Hi, this is Chris Colosimo, Product Manager from Parasoft. I wanted to take some time to talk about how combining the power of Azure, VSTS, and Parasoft allows us to accelerate our migration into the cloud. To begin with, let's talk about the cloud. For many reasons, organizations are opting a strategy that is having us move our development, our testing, our deployment, and ultimately production systems into the cloud. And we're doing this for a number of reasons. Most importantly, hardware costs. It's much easier to have our applications running in Azure rather than having them run on our own hardware within our physical premise. Additionally, it's easier to federate out development activities when multiple users can log into Azure. And there's an additional host of reasons why organizations are making this change. But this becomes quite difficult for developers and testers to handle this migration for the simple fact that they're not exactly sure how to get themselves into the cloud. Now, developers and testers take time to create applications that are multi-tiered, front-end, middleware, back-end. And it's not as simple as just simply taking the application and stuffing it into the cloud. There's so many things that have to be considered, and every developer and every application is unique. Now, through the power of VSTS, a large portion of this is simplified. You see, VSTS allows us to have a development bed where we can do our actual development in Visual Studio in the cloud. And by combining VSTS and Azure, we can easily deploy those applications right into the Azure infrastructure, which means that a lot of the process is simplified. But what about those other components, those back-end systems? I'm developing an application and I require a back-end database. Or I require another application from another team that has not made the migration to Azure. Then I have to figure out all sorts of on-prem to cloud cross configuration, and it can become cumbersome. Lots of organizations are trying to weigh the cost of migration versus the hardware and access savings that they get. And sometimes they simply don't make the decision not to move an application into the cloud. Well, how do we do our full stack? Well, VSTS to the rescue. So VSTS, in combination with Parasoft Virtualize, allows us to deploy simulation into Azure. Simulation through the use of virtual services, services that are representations of the actual services, but do not require the complex deployment. This will allow us to then have our application up into the cloud much sooner than we target for, because we don't have to understand all the complexities of deploying all these different pieces. Virtual services will allow us to have just the right components to give us stability to our test environment. But then we have the challenge of how to test an application that's in the cloud. Now, ordinarily on-prem, we would have all of our Selenium tests, our API tests, our end-to-end tests that we could run from our test harness. But when we go up into the cloud, we have to think about how do we migrate all of those testing activities and the data up into the cloud. Well, VSTS to the rescue again. VSTS can, as a function of deploying virtual services in an environment to support our application, can actually then kick off all sorts of automated testing, API, mobile testing, web, end-to-end testing against our application, which really accelerates our ability to take advantage of all of the cost savings that Azure bring to us, but makes it a lot safer and easier for us to get the application into the cloud. Well, let me walk through a demo where I have an application that I've partially deployed into the cloud, and I'm going to use simulation on demand to stabilize the test environment, which will allow me to not only test my application, but it will pave the way for me to have automated testing going forward. So let's start in VSTS. So in VSTS, I have my entire application development practice taking place. And one of the things that I've done is I've created a release, a build and a release for an application that I have. Now what I'm going to do right now is I've actually deployed this application, and I'm going to go ahead and go in here and go to test this application. let me just grab the Azure, just make sure that's right. Here I am in Azure. This is my IP address. So I'll go ahead and drop this. Okay. And here's my application. Now again, I was developing this in VSTS, so it made it quite simple for me to deploy this into the cloud. However, a portion of my application, i.e. the database, has not been deployed, and I'm not exactly sure how to do it. And it's having the unfortunate side effect of making one of my workflows not work. Because you see what happens here is this application goes and points out at a series of backend systems, one of which is this loan processor system, and it's been really hard for me to get this deployed into the cloud. Well, one of the things that I can do inside of VSTS is I can take advantage of a new task that is available from Parasoft that will allow me to deploy the application. So here I am inside of the deployment activities. I'm going to go ahead and click on the tasks. And you'll notice here, this is my attempt to try to get that backend system up into the cloud, and I wasn't really successful. So I simply added this Parasoft Service Virtualization Deploy task from the VSTS Marketplace into my deployment tasks, and you'll see that one of the things that I have the ability to do is to deploy into my application a series of virtual services. Those virtual services just live in a library of different services that have been developed on-prem, and I can easily shove them right into my Azure instance and have those components available. So let me go ahead and build this here and go ahead and go through the tasks to allow me to put those virtual services up there. So I'll go ahead and start by running a release. I'll go ahead and say, go ahead and do that. And while it's running that release, let's go ahead and take a look at the log so we can see what it's actually doing up in the cloud. And there's not a whole lot of magic to this. Basically what it's doing is it's going through and deploying my application. Let me actually go in here. This is a new release. This is release 10. So we'll go into release 10. Look at that log again. Okay. So standard VSTS and Azure process. It's taking the war, building my code, deploying my code into the application. Then what it does is it goes and deploys the actual virtual services into. And there it goes. Now it's deploying those virtual services into my Azure instance. All right, it's done. Post-deployment approval, everything is good. So now what I have inside of my application is a virtual representation of my services. I'm going to go ahead and just redeploy this application. Sorry, not redeploy. I'm going to rerun my test here. And now we'll see that my application is now being supported by simulation in the backend, which is great because now it allows me to continue to develop and test my application without having to worry about those backend services. Now, having these virtual services deployed as a template allows me to actually accelerate my testing activities as well, because the virtual services and the test cases are tied together and they're closely linked to my VSTS project. And what it means is that every time that I have a build from VSTS, I can simply execute all of those tests against my application with virtual backend systems. And I can customize those virtual backend systems and test cases for just the right type of testing that I'm doing, whether it's standard functional testing, performance testing, security testing. I can constantly build and redeploy my application knowing that I'll have the full stability of my backend systems under my control. And what does this do? It allows me to get much more meaningful test results from my application and accelerates my migration into the cloud. For more information on cloud deployment, visit Microsoft's VSTS page as well as Parasoft's virtualize page and show how, through the power of the virtualized task, we can deploy simulation through VSTS. Thank you.